Hello, everyone, and welcome to an evening of celebrating poetry and the people who bring it to us as National Poetry Month draws to a close. I'm your host for tonight's virtual event, VPR Morning Edition host Mitch Wertlieb, and I have a confession to make right out of the gate here because for most of my life, despite being a dedicated book lover, I did struggle to understand and define poetry. And it wasn't until making this confession to the poet Billy Collins when he visited Vermont some years ago that he responded with a simple remark that solved my dilemma almost instantly. And it really opened my doors of perception to verse in a way that's had me embracing the form in all its splendor ever since. He said to me, "Poetry isn't a math problem, it's not something to be solved." And that really tracks with some things some other famous poets have said about their craft, including such luminaries as Robert Frost, who said, "Writing free verse is like playing tennis with the net down," and William Wordsworth, calling poetry the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origin from emotion, recollected in tranquility. And when it comes to poetry's value to the human spirit, E. Cummings was quite direct. He said, "Write poetry for God's sake. It's the only thing that matters." Well, for at least the duration of tonight's event, I hope that rings true for everybody watching and taking part because we are so fortunate this evening to be joined by some remarkable poets, including a man I miss dearly, as I used to see him on a nearly daily basis at the studios of Vermont Public Radio, where he shared his outstanding musical knowledge with listeners as the host of Friday Night Jazz from 2013 to 2018. But Reuben Jackson's talents don't end with the drop of a needle on vinyl. He's kind of like a Swiss Army knife of the arts. As an educator and mentor with the Young Writers Project in Burlington, he has a great sense of humor as well, as you can tell. He also taught poetry for more than a decade at the Writers Center in Bethesda, Maryland, and was a high school teacher for 2 years in Burlington. His poems have been published in over 40 anthologies. His first volume, Fingering the Keys, was chosen for the Columbia Book Award. All impressive things, Reuben, yes, but they do pale in comparison to the cameo appearance that you made in the Call Me Maybe video, the lip syncing video starring myself and former Vermont Edition host Jane Lindholm. And she's the host of the
It's
podcast,
the
Bud Wine,
best.
of
The
course.
best.
And it apparently still exists somewhere,
It's
although,
on YouTube.
oh, don't do that, Reuben. I was not going to mention
Okay.
that at all.
Okay. We never had this conversation.
Reuben Jackson's most recent collection of poems is called Scattered Clouds, published in 2019. Reuben, thank you so much for joining us today from your current home in Washington, D.C. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. I'll be in the 802 tomorrow, but I'm home. I'm here tonight. People call me um, a Vermonter who has a DC job, which is really a sweet thing to say. And
It's a sweet
so,
thing.
yeah, it's great to be here. It's great to be here.
Thank you so
Uh,
much for being here.
yeah. Yeah.
Also with us tonight is Kerrin McCadden, an award-winning poet who lives in South Burlington. And I know this because, full disclosure, we're neighbors. Hi, neighbor.
Hey, my neighbor.
Kerrin's latest book of poems is called American Wake, which has been named as a finalist for this year's Vermont Book Award in the poetry category. And if she wins, it will be her second time doing so, as her book Landscape with Plywood Silhouettes won the Vermont Book Award in 2015. Kerrin McCadden earned an MFA from Warren Wilson College and has received fellowships and awards from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Sustainable Arts Foundation, and the Vermont Arts Council, among other organizations. Kerrin, so great to be speaking with you again.
Thanks for having me. So good to see you.
Also with us today is a young poet who is nevertheless a veteran of the form. Rajnii Eddins became the youngest member of the African American Writers Alliance when he was just 11 years old and has been writing verse ever since. He's just north of 40 years old now, and his latest book of poetry is called Their Names Are Mine, which was published in 2019. He's also a teacher, an occasional MC, and a facilitator in Burlington. Originally from Seattle, Washington, he's been living in Vermont now for more than a decade. Rajnii Eddins, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here with you all.
And we do have a bit of bad news before we get to the good stuff. We were hopeful to have Bianca Stone with us tonight. She is a writer and visual artist who's published numerous volumes of poetry, including Someone Else's Wedding Vows, poetry comics from the Book of Hours, and the Mobius Strip Club of Grief. All titles which are so good they sound like poems in and of themselves. Unfortunately, though, Bianca was not able to make it for tonight's event. She does send her regrets, We will miss her for sure, but do make an effort to check out some of her extraordinary work and what she's done as well as director of programs for the Ruth Stonehouse. That is a literary nonprofit artist residency, letterpress studio, and community poetry center that is named after the legendary poet Ruth Stone, who is Bianca's grandmother and whose achievements over a lifetime of penning verse include being named a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for her 2008 volume, What Love Comes To, New and Selected Poems. We're so sorry Bianca could not be here with us tonight, and she is too. But again, please do check out her work and perhaps revisit the Brave Little State episode that VPR produced back in 2019 about Vermont's abundant literary community. Bianca was gracious enough to allow me to also attend the class that she taught on poetry with students at the Vermont College of Fine Arts for that episode, and it was a richer program for it. You can find that at vpr.org or by searching past episodes of Brave Little State. But again, we're so lucky to have these wonderful poets with us tonight. Thank you again all so much for being here. We've got some wonderful folks who are watching tonight. I know they're poetry lovers and they can't wait to hear you read some of your poems. And we're going to talk about the form as well. And I want to start out by asking first how you all came to poetry, because it's not something that's automatic. I talked about, it was a tough thing for me to grasp. Didn't happen until way later in life. What's sort of like the first memory of poetry being something that you wanted to embrace? And Rajnii, I want to start with you because, again, 11 years old, you started writing poetry. What was it? How did you embrace the form? What appealed to you to it?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I definitely have my mother to thank for that. She is the founder of the first Black writers group in the Northwest, known as the African American Writers Alliance. She was always priming me as a child to read her pieces back to her with feeling. That was important. So I discovered I had a grasp for a love for the expressive potency of language even before I came to my own journey as a writer. So with the advent of that founding of that group, being exposed to so many different artists, poets, storytellers, playwrights, singers, songwriters, I think that rich exposure to the Black community and the Black arts movement and culture really immersed me in a certain space and gave me a love for my own voice and the power and potency that words can have. And I think just that really fundamentally shaped me as a child, having a space where adults honored and respected me. So just witnessing and marveling at my mother's own wizardry with word, sound power, and then being immersed in such a richer community that definitely offered me quite a gift.
Wizardry with words. Yeah, that sounds about right. Kerrin, do you remember your earliest encounters with poetry?
I'm laughing, remembering my first poem was about my hamster. So that I was in fourth grade. But I was a child of the church, and I listened to sort of high level of language every Sunday and memorized it. And the cadences of the scripture in Mass was really important to me, understanding the music of language. And then I also was a really rebellious kid in lots of ways. And my mom gave me books and to read poetry books. And one of them that she accidentally gave me was the New American Poetry, I think it was New American Poets, New American Poetry, 1945 to 1960. And it was all the beat poets and radical ways you could use language. And it was so exciting to me. And I also read early on the poetry of Yevgeny Yevtushenko, just, otherworldly, beautiful work in translation. And I was studying French. And so it was in high school getting these books where things weren't boring, like nothing was boring in these books. It was a compact and exciting language. And I just wanted to experiment with words from then on.
Wow, your mom was pretty smart to do that. Reuben, how about you? What were your first memories of really encountering poetry and loving it?
Boy, Kerrin copied off my paper. First thing I would say, in terms of like influence, I come from a family of ministers on both sides, and I always tell students the first poets I heard were ministers, and the old AM DJs with that rapid fire, after Mutual News at the top of the hour, Sam Cooke. So that, and to echo what Kerrin was saying, it's the musicality of language. Ministers are also great at, it's like thematic organization, which is not unlike music, and of course that's composition. So I was smitten with the sound. Remember that old movie, The Sound of Music? Smitten with the sound and what was possible within this expression. And there were people in my neighborhood who could turn certain profane phrases into, sonatas or sonnets, and I would just something taps you on the shoulder. That's it. Or like the rapper Most Def said, when love calls your name, you gotta pursue. I heard it, and my parents were voluminous readers. My father had an anthology, it's like poetry and prose of England, and it had Shakespeare, and I'm this little kid running around the block going, "Who is Sylvia? Who is she?" So I was gone pretty much from square one.
And it sounds like that connection with music. You keep talking about, the sound, and I think you mentioned the cadence. And is that are they wedded together in some way, music and poetry?
Oh, no doubt. I think about the writer Amiri Baraka called poetry speech music. He spelled it Musicked. And for me, it's the destination, the narrative, within a piece. But I often, again, tell students, don't sleep on the sound, kind of revel in it like a good, can I say Chablis on it? I forget, like a good Chablis, we take, I think we take the sound for granted, just as you can do with music, but it is music. And I mean, of course, you could get all nerdy here and talk about similarities between, poetic structure and music, but I love the sound. I take long drives. Last time I was in Vermont, right before the pandemic started, I'm driving downstate, and I always recite Dylan Thomas poems on long drives, and it's the sound of, if I were tickled by the rub of love, a rooking girl who stole me for a side. See, I think I'm dropping science like Jay-Z or somebody, but it's all part of that thing. It's this broad, tall, deep tradition. I used to say this stuff on the radio too. It's Friday night. I'm having a flashback. I'm sorry.
That's fine. We want to bring you back to Vermont. So this is all part of the plan. Okay. I love that you have those phrases in your head where you can just rattle off pieces of poetry like that. That's remarkable to me. Rajnii Eddins, you're an educator as well. Is it difficult to teach poetry? Maybe that's even the wrong phrase. To present poetry, to introduce it to young people. What do they ask you about it? What confuses them, or what
That's
do
a
they
good
like?
question.
I think it's about sincerity, just holding space in a way that you honor, that you respect their intelligence, and that this is not something that's needs to be placed on a pedestal outside of the reach of every human being having a vital story that's unique and beautiful and valuable. So I think when you engage in that space and kind of set a tone in a sincere way, and you have passion for your own craft and for the craft itself, that lends itself to holding space for youth to be more willing to be courageously vulnerable, exploring maybe things they had not yet. The doorways is so much richness. I actually had a really valuable experience. I don't want to put this particular student on blast, but they shared some profound feedback with me when we had an event at the Vermont Common Schools. And I think this was sixth graders, probably 11 or 12 years old. And one of the last lines of their comment was, I can get this right. He won the war of my faraway caged hidden heart.
Oh no!
And I'm like, that's poetry in and of itself. I was like, what? I'm like,
Mic drop. I'm dropping.
Exactly.
I
I'm
mean,
like, oh my God. It's how many of us feel that way or have felt this way over the course of this past period we've all endured. So I think poetry really lends itself, especially when you're holding space in sincere ways for youth, to them being invited to that precipice of their own exposure to their brilliance and storytelling and holding space for self-expression.
And Kerrin, you taught poetry in high school for many years, and I guess a difficult question maybe is what happens when someone brings you a poem and you want to not critique it so much, but say this can be changed in a way, or maybe you're not letting yourself express yourself the way. In other words, because poetry is not a math problem, like I said at the top, there's no solution, there's no right answer. How do you let someone know they're doing the right thing with their poetry? And again, I'm using the wrong words here because I'm not a poet. There is no right or wrong, but you know what I mean? Like something that could be better, let's say.
Yeah, well, it's not a math problem, but there are balances, right? There are pieces and elements, and like it's like a machine. I always think of a poem as like a little wind up toy and you wind it up and then you got it going, and it's got to be able to move. It's got to be able to do its work. And so I often talk to kids about what they could still put in, just like it's a container. Like, what else could fit inside this container? Could you try? A lot of the time, what they don't have is image. They don't have anything to see, because a lot of it's they like to put their emotions in. So I'll ask them to put something in that we can see, or we look at words like, what is the tone of the words you've used, and is there another word that would just sound really cool there, and make it an experimentation or like a game. And I think kids are interested in adding to their work if they know that there could be a fun effect at the end of adding something new. So it's for me, it's always about emphasis on the positive in generation and generative experiments. So that tends to help kids feel like we're working together and I'm not correcting them.
Reuben, in your experience with kids teaching the art form, what are some of the things they've come to you? What are some of the questions that have sort of stopped you in your tracks and said, wow, okay, this is somebody who wants to be embracing this art form and I can really help them with it?
I've come across a number of students who were just, their passion for language was unabashed. And they were, I often think about this young woman. This was some years ago. This was a sixth grade student. Her heart was on fire, and she came in the room. It's like you almost had to hold her back because there was so much she wanted to say, and she had so many questions. One of her questions was, where do I go? Because there's so much I want to say. Like, I'm in this classroom, but and I think where did I go also referred to, beyond this, questions about publishing, those sorts of things. I'll say this isn't an exact answer to your question, but one of the things I consistently encounter, even times, was this notion that, breaking down the wall, which students have, and it's amazing how long this has persisted, probably as long as the form itself, that poetry is not for us. It's this thing for people with a lot of letters after their names, PhD, this, and is my expression, is my singularity, back to what Rajnii was saying, his birthday, is this worthy of the plateau? And as a teacher, I believe in what I call the open door. I don't call it a theory, but it's like a potluck. And I say, oh, you might bring brie, you might bring hot wings. I'm like, let's go. And in terms of critiquing things, maybe say there, in my humble, flawed opinion, there are like 2 or 3 images that are just incredible. But I said, this is the foundation for the house, and where do you go from there? I'm a little sedate as a workshop leader. I'm being facetious, but I've come up behind kids in classes and I'll stick my finger in their back and I say, I'm jacking you for the 4th image in the 3rd stanza. That's how bad it is. And, good, bad. And have them read it out loud to hear the beauty and to show that. And, I've had students, for example, that were baseball fans. I said, look, say you have like 3 good lines out of a poem that's 10 lines. I said, if you're batting 300 baseball, that's good.
You're in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, there you go. I'm going like this. And the possibilities are endless. That's one thing I love about, you never know. You go into a workshop, you'll hear something you never heard before. And I'm always saying, it's not just, I'm not some old guy standing at the gate saying, well, you're not William Wordsworth. It's this long tradition. It's like Wordsworth and Keats and Rajnii and, Mos Def and Queen. It's all this stuff. And throw your stuff in the pot. It's that big pot of gumbo, right? So I'm sorry, I'm a little sedate tonight.
No, you're wonderful, Reuben. Come on. This is so great to hear. I love the way you all describe these things. You instantly have that gift for metaphor, which I don't have. And it's one of the reasons I love poets and love talking to poets and talking about poetry. And we're going to get to some poems, I promise, in just a moment, folks. I also want to mention to viewers, if you have any questions that you would like to ask of our poets tonight, please go ahead and put them down and we'll try to get to them as best we can. Otherwise, we're just going to keep on yapping here. I do want to mention too, Reuben mentioned that today is Duke Ellington's birthday. And Reuben, as I understand it, you are archivist and curator for the Smithsonian's Duke Ellington collection, which is
I
quite
was for 20 years. Yeah. I,
remarkable.
yeah. I still don't believe it, you know.
I'm going to play Stevie Wonder's Sir Duke later just to celebrate because I was not aware that it was his birthday today until you mentioned it.
Yeah.
I do want to ask one more quick question though, because
Mhm.
Reuben mentioned the before times. These last 2 years plus, we're still in it. It's just
Mhm.
rough. Not just the pandemic, but lots of other things too. I think many folks by now have picked up on Rajnii's hat tonight, which I love, by the way. Thanks for wearing that this evening. Rajnii, I do want to ask, in these last 2 years, did you find your poetry, your approach to it, whether it's reading it, writing it, teaching it, change at all? And if so, how? Or have you just been steadily going along with what you normally do?
Yeah, when the pandemic first ensued, I was returning back from my first leg of uh, my tour out west, going back to my home state of Washington and hometown of Seattle, and then my friend just told me you have to wear masks on the way back. It was pretty surreal, I think, for us all. And so when we got back, all the things that we were going to do kind of got canceled because we had to socially distance. And then there was this pivot towards, are you willing to do this online, or can we still be willing to engage youth in this capacity? And I never really done that actively before, but I said, okay, at this point, let's give it a whirl. I felt like pretty strongly like it was important that we have some semblance of connection, as some way that we could still share mutual inspiration and empowerment and value in a way that could sustain us. So that really was tremendously um, challenging for me, but also kind of self-actualizing, because I found out that if you continue in that same vein of being able to communicate from a place of sincerity in spaces where like it draws on tremendous aspects of the resiliency of the human spirit, to still maintain that space, because you can read you pretty clearly. So if you don't believe it, they know you don't believe it. So you got to foster that strength in yourself and know that folks are depending on art and creativity and imagination to sustain us and offer us a place of optimism and hope and refueling and replenishing of our spirit. So that part was really super powerful and potent for me.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to ask some questions about young people and your interactions with them, because I feel it's so important to grow the next generation and to not let this art form dissipate in any way. I don't think it is, but again, I think it's something that a lot of people find difficult to grasp sometimes because it's not a novel, it's not a short story, it's not a beginning, a middle, and an end necessarily. But it's there is so much emotion and sincerity, as you said, Rajnii, in poetry, and the form can be so flexible and so malleable. I think that it offers young people the hope that you were talking about, and I just think that's incredibly important. So thank you for mentioning that. I want to hear some of your poems now. I'm not really sure who to start with. Who wants to go first? Raise a hand. You all do. You know you do. All right, Rajnii, let's hear one of your poems. Give us the title and let's get to it.
Awesome. I feel like this is a fitting beginning, especially since we're kind of segueing from speaking about our experience during the pandemic. This is called In Our Wake. Inside these hands, a golden chance. Within these walls, a castle falls, while all the peasants dance. Where does one turn in a house of mirrors? If everywhere you look, there you are. If silence becomes too loud to hear over the bird songs. When touch seems a distant stranger, fuzzy and still wet with hazy memory. No one said anything about the masks we'd wear over the masks we wore before. And yet the sun still shines through gloom, and flowers dare to bloom. I saw a patch of onion. A robin thrusting his chest out eyed me suspiciously, as if to say, "What are you doing here?" It appears we are still here. Maybe we can outlive and outgrow our shadows. Maybe life will look us square in the eyeball and not notice our flinching imperceptibly, or see it and still forgive us our immortal mortalities. Maybe today will be the day the walls part like seas and the ceilings raise and the light has its way with us. Maybe the rain will merge with the sweat born of our contained lives and become indistinguishable. Maybe we'll take ourselves out of ourselves, cast away the plastic packaging, and see something more alive, something more fun to play with than fear and shallow mirrors. Maybe we can be friendly to ourselves, even when the world is not watching. When the ceaseless eye of Babylon has gone to sleep or long died, we can be here, creating, musing, imagining, envisioning life as it could and can be, and leave what it was and is in our wake.
Mm. Where do you turn in a room full of mirrors? Wow. You wrote that one. I'm guessing sometime in the last 2 years. I mean, you're talking about masks, the masks we wore before, the masks that cover. When you write a poem like that, Rajnii, how I don't want to say how long does it take, you know, it's not like you're necessarily doing a workout or whatever, but was that one that you completed in one shot? Is it something that you worked on over time?
Yes, we tend to do this format with the group that my mother and I co-founded called the Poetry Experience, where we'll share pieces, but we also give each other words and then set a timer for a certain span of time, and then just free write based on whatever those words offer us in any form or fashion we choose to use them to make a story, a song, a poem, prose, any type of expression, just to have an exercise to be playful with your imagination and see what comes out with no judgment. So that was one of those particular exercises. And it actually was written probably 2 or 3 weeks after I had returned from Seattle, Washington, when everything kind of shut down. So I pivoted to doing the Poetry Experience online and actually connected with a former mentee of mine from back out west, because that's one thing that the pandemic did allow us to connect with people from a wide range of different places. So that's kind of how that piece was formed.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Kerrin, would you like to read something now?
Sure. I'm going to read a little poem that's called Awake. And we're talking about the pandemic a little bit. And one of the things that I found really difficult during the pandemic was just, I don't know, knowing who I was, if that makes sense. Like knowing who we are. Like I'm so used to a life filled with people, and to be isolated. And it was just an interesting question, you know. And this poem is sort of playing with that idea a little bit. It's called Awake. This morning I bramble toward waking, alarm, 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 snarling my dreams, like little girls around a pile of marbles, arguing quitsies, no quitsies. This morning I don't know. This morning I am lagging with my dead, reminding them they have already gone first. I knuckle down on the day, make strides and comebacks. I ride a train and write and keep crossing out the word rather. I never know what I want until afternoon, and sometimes trim the walkway instead of thinking. I pull the curtain on who I am, keep shame from my sleeping like a terrarium of whistles. Somewhere, someone finds me phenomenal. I stand so tall and keep the future as a pet. Together, we swim the headwaters like children who don't know the rules. I forget who is playing for fair and who for keeps.
It's beautiful. I kept thinking about lines I wanted to ask about, and then there was the next line. Why the crossing out the word rather? Again, I'm not looking for a definitive meaning here, but that phrase leapt out at me. What did you mean by that?
Well, you know, the math, this is the answer to the math problem, the math equation. I just the idea of wishing for something, you know, you're writing and you'd rather have something than something else. You'd rather have something and like just keep crossing it out. Like, well, what do I want things? Do I not want, like, just this notion of like, can we want anything? And also just some whimsicality. The poem was really trying to play, you know, and it was just, I picked a word that I wanted to keep crossing out in the act of writing. And that was the one I thought would be fun to try to play with.
Fantastic.
Thanks.
Reuben Jackson, if you would, please.
What the last couple of years have presented me, and it's part of an ongoing process. You know, I quoted Amiri Baraka earlier, but he said, let my poems be a graph of me, graph. And I do think that happens with work, that you can look back and see what you're uh, questioning, dealing with, struggling with, or to quote, and then what you come up with, like the band Kool and the Gang had that old song Hollywood Swinging with the line, "Hey, hey, hey, what you got to say?" So figuring out what you got to say, and a lot of what I've been addressing is what it means to be older, which started in Vermont, like 2016, 2017, just uh, scratching at things and well, God, I quote a lot of writers. Langston Hughes, one of the volumes of his autobiographies, I wonder as I wander. So I'm wondering as I'm wandering, and then we have this great quiescence and great um, tragedy occurring, beginning in 2020. But I started working more honestly, more, I guess, fervently, not, I don't want to sound pretentious here, but thinking about what it means to be old and putting these things in the voice of a character named Kelly Donaldson, who's, he's a bit of a curmudgeon. He's a pretty nice guy. But and the last thing I'll say before I read this, I work at the City University as an archivist with jazz materials, and some of the students know me well. Like the other day, I ran into some students I hadn't seen in a while, and one of them used the phrase "back during COVID" or "back during the pandemic," and the other young man said, "Don't say that around Professor Jackson. I'm not a professor," but he gets cranky about it. Because I said, "Yeah, it's not back during the pandemic because it's not over." Anyway, so some of that is in this poem, which is entitled "Kelly on Middle Age." I like glaring at phone addicted young'uns who hog the seats on subways set aside for seniors until they take their blank gazes elsewhere. I also love talking old school jams with the coffee shop crew. We have no money, fixed incomes, yo, no girlfriends, and no more verbal reticence. Some days, my boy Melvin said recently, my knees creak like coffin handles in need of 3-in-1 oil. There used to be more of us laughing at his jokes.
I feel like you dropped us into a movie there. I mean, starting out with that scene on the bus, the kids looking in their phones. It's the imagery. It's you paint such beautiful pictures, all of you. We have this question from Susan and Mark Hardy for any of tonight's poets. They're just throwing it out there. Is there tension for you between the millennia of history, tradition, style, and structure of poetry with the quote?
Wow.
So I'm just trying to throw. Yeah, you've got the question right there in front of you. And anybody that wants to tackle that.
I'll say something here. When I was in my 20s, I went to Goddard College in Vermont, which some of you know. I hated things like, well, revision is not, it is part of the tradition, but I have always loved a broad array. And see, my love for Dylan Thomas, for example, or Keats or Shelley doesn't mean I can't also love um, Gwendolyn Brooks or Rajnii or any contemporary writers. I remain curious because I believe and my heart draws me to what Patti Smith used this phrase years ago. It's the sea of possibilities. So I used to say when I was hosting Friday Night Jazz, people would say, "How can you love, like Thelonious Monk and the Bad Plus?" I said, "Yeah, my father and his friends would put you in a room and they'd say, 'Here's Led Zeppelin, and here's Charlie Parker.' And they point a gun at your head, metaphorically speaking, and they would say, 'Pick one.' And I would always say, 'What if you love them both?' So I just try to keep abreast, and I thank my parents for having such a wide array of materials, written materials, musical, and it's kept me going. I'm always curious to hear what the next chorus or choruses will be. And as my fellow educator writers will probably say, it's so encouraging not only to see younger writers pick up the mantle, but to take it somewhere else, to be themselves.
I miss you just made me miss your music show so much because you just
Thanks.
mentioned at the beginning of that two of my favorite Thelonious Monk, who I came to love when I saw the movie Straight No Chaser, the documentary.
Right, sure.
Just wonderful. And then I saw the Bad Plus play here in Vermont at the Flynn Space, which was one of the great concerts I ever saw. Just absolutely brilliant stuff. Thank you for sharing that with us. Rajnii, I'd love for you to read us another poem.
Oh, definitely. I think this next piece I want to share with you is going to come from my text. Their names are mine. It's called "I Want to Write About Trees." I want to write about trees, but the lifeless dangling from their branches raise my pen from the dead. I hear their voices on the prairies, singing in the running waters. The beauty of nature tells me everywhere there is light, even amidst the ugliness of humankind. And I see it in you, even when you don't. See it in me, seeing it in yourself. Where are Frost and Whitman? Traveling roads less traveled is something we have grown accustomed to. Our roots so deep they cling to soil old long before nature had a name. This game of cat and mouse that fattens sows for the butcher. I sit by the rivers of my mothers, humming songs my fathers hummed when they were lovers. Still, I want to write about trees, not wretched countries dying by degrees, oblivious decrees to bullet-ridden bodies and spiritual disease, hideous amnesia and hostilities to Negroes taking these. I'd write about the wind, but I still smell the burning skin upon the breeze. Even in these sheaves I taste the blood upon the leaves. 'Tis why through the majestic beauty of the seasons, I mourn the morn at dawn and grieve the eve. Greener pastures, skies of azure I receive. I want to note the clouds of hope that stream and beam. This knotted oak that chokes my throat won't let me breathe, lest I raise my pen to paint each limb of the deceased. I'll write my first nature poem when with my kin I feel at home and not a beast, some periodic sacrifice for them to feast. When oceans blue do not review a vanquished peace, when my love is not returned with evil deeds. I'll plant a seed for every herb, flower, and fruit that ever be, when that discord within the horde finds melody. When these brown hands dig in the soil, toil for peace, when our allegiance to its meanings, loyalty.
Wow. Tell me you know about Colin Kaepernick without telling me you know about Colin Kaepernick. For one thing. For another thing, the musicality of that, the
The
rhyme.
music. Whew.
I would say something, pithy here, but I can't. That was like a hammer blow. That was brilliant. It started out very personal to me. It sounded like you were speaking to one other person. And then it seemed to grow into something much wider and something much bigger that encompassed everything, everything we've all been going through and then experiencing, and yet you want to write about trees. You want that moment which we all love in Vermont, where we can get out in nature and just be. That's a poem I'd love to have in my head as I'm walking the dog out in the woods somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just thank you for that.
Mhm.
Kerrin McCadden, can we come back to you, please, for another poem?
Sure. And I'm still thinking about Rajnii's poem and the sound in it, and the question that we were asked about the tension between tradition and the millennia of history and the current moment, and just thinking about the compression of rhyme, like how there's so much soundscape in that poem, and that in the earlier forms, right, that wasn't really what we had room for. And so there was all these prescriptions about how we need to make sound. And I think that the most exciting thing about now is that we invent form and we invent sound and we invent what a poem is when we write them. And it's like a perfect example of taking rhyme into the current moment in a beautiful way. So, and also just thinking too, I'm going to read a poem, but just thinking too about in the millennia of history, you have to go back not very far before you can't find women writing poetry, right? The idea of women being poets is an invention of the modern time in education and public education and educating women. So that's the other thing too. The tension is like, where are my foremothers? Where are the women I can read from the 1600s? There are some, but there's not There's not a pile of them. So I think that that's an interesting thing to think about when we think about tradition. I just want to answer that question a little bit about how we're inventing voice in poetry right now. I'm going to read a poem called Planetarium, and it's trying to mix together grief and a love. It's a grief poem and a love poem in the same space. And it's just a content warning. It's about an overdose. Planetarium. I roamed the antique shops in town to outfit our new house, bringing home 2 flying saucer lamps, a silver bracelet with a blank field for a name, and a vintage Nova home planetarium to surprise you, thinking you would be someone who had one as a boy, and set it on the dresser in our bedroom, giddy to show you. I unpack a few boxes, poking around the house like an adventurer who doesn't believe in booby traps. My mother calls to say my brother has overdosed and is gone. Her voice is a long and terrible song that grows a crack in my chest, or my bones double. Our home becomes a replica of a home, twice as big as a place I can call home, then collapses flat. I make some necessary phone calls. Friends come to sit with me in pajamas and listen. That night in bed, I stare at the ceiling and tell you every story. I walk you back with me. I expand too. I want to know where he is, really, where. I have asked so many times now, where is gone? You get up as if to go to the bathroom or some other mundane, dark of night, glass of water chore, and I think, no, not now. But you turn on the planetarium and light up the sky so I can see where he is.
I'm just gonna take a beat there. Yeah, where he's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Kerrin, you and I have talked before. You were gracious enough to speak about that very personal moment. If people didn't pick up on it, maybe they don't know. You are talking about your brother who did die of an opioid overdose.
Yes.
So sorry, of course, but I guess I have to ask kind of a mundane question, a dumb question, but did it help at all for you to be writing about this?
I don't think so. Not to be
no, thank you.
Not to be snarky. I think the effort is to try to, through storytelling, to try to help other people in some way, to know that they're not alone, to know that the story is not a shameful. I mean, it's a kind of story that so many of us would like to keep secret, and I think it's important for people to know that these losses happen, and that that sounds so silly to say. Of course they happen, but just to have people who can write about them, and to share stories. I think that's what we're all doing, sharing stories and trying to feel less alone. I think that's one of the best things poems can do. So I don't think it helps me personally, except that I guess I can take it outside of myself and make an artifact. Like, here's this artifact that I created that makes me feel like I've codified the experience in some way. So I guess in some way it's helpful, but it doesn't help emotionally, I don't think, that much.
I appreciate that honest answer, and I hope I'm not being too Pollyanna in thinking that it can help someone else who's going through that. We know that in the past year, Vermont experienced more opioid overdose deaths than any other time in the state's history. This is not a problem that's affecting one person. It's affecting so many people. And I just want to thank you again for sharing that incredibly moving poem with us. Thank you. Reuben Jackson, do you have another poem you'd like to share with us?
Sure. I'm thinking about, well, again, the notion of variations on a theme and some of the ideas that my playground friends have expressed. That sounds silly, but I'm happy to have lived long enough to found other friends on the playground who love language, and the courage to be yourself and write is gangster. I just want to, if there's ever a statue for me somewhere, I can say, well, Reuben said the courage to be blah blah blah. When I lived in Vermont, I used to go to Glover a lot, and sit under the trees, and I mention this because I'm an urban kid, and I kept a lot of my need for solace or my need to be myself on the down low, even as a young person, starting very early. And I would sneak away to try and be myself. Uh, this poem, this is another Kelly poem, but it's, I think, addressing, it's like two young people with dreams, and like Quincy Jones said, their imaginations are out of control, but they're also in the midst of what mayhem might be overstating it, but turmoil. I'll put it that way. So this is Kelly Recalls number 59. My friend Tony and I used to go to the movies and watch debonair MFs like Cary Grant on the down low. The hood had its restful, sea-smooth brothers, but Tony and I were also hooked on the enormous screen and popcorn baptized in butter. One day, when we were alternately humming a haunting Dmitri Tiomkin soundtrack and keeping an eye out for locally grown extortionists like Tyrone, we imagined being Botany 500 suit wearing, espresso sipping in French bistros, wise and world weary brothers, hearts broken like gin bottles in the alley behind my house. So it's combining what you dream of. Robert Hayden has this poem called Double Feature. It's like at Dunbar Castle or Arcade where we were other for an hour or two. So there's that, juxtaposed with, well, the gin bottles behind the house. So what, um, you know, I don't want to turn this into like a Dr. Phil episode or anything,
No, no,
but,
we can make this whatever we want. That's the beauty of it tonight.
yeah.
Even you wrote, and I had to write these down as you're writing it because there's some
Mhm.
again, poetry. When I hear something that just slams me, I just gotta like write it down. Debonair MFs like Cary Grant, baptized in butter.
Mhm.
Can I say, where do you find the courage to write like that? Honestly, phrases like that to me, that's courageous. It probably doesn't feel like that to you. I feel like those are courageous words. They're brilliant. They hit home and they're so fun. Also, where do you find the courage to do that?
Well, thank you. I turned 65 this past October, and this is another Vermont connection to courage. I did not call myself a poet until October 2017, before I uh, gave a talk with who I know he's not there anymore, when Major Jackson, the great poet Major Jackson,
Oh
taught
yes,
at the University of Vermont. So the courage you address is a process, and it's taken me. It takes time, and I mean, there's the work, there's the revision, and I call it moving the furniture around within a piece, no matter what. But again, I'm thankful to. Uh, I'm a little closer to being consolidated internally as opposed to, aisles in Shaw's or Hannaford's or somewhere. Like, the boy who loves opera is in aisle 2. The one, who wish he could have kissed so and so in 6th grade is in aisle 7. It's Reuben. And also, this is where education comes in, the courage that students have to give it up. Like Marvin Gaye had that song, "You Got to Give It Up." They'd give it up, and I'm thinking, whoa, you're moved by the singularity and the power, but it's also like, you can do this. And I tell them, education, when it's working, is like tennis. It's back and forth, back and forth. So it's been a series of things, and I do thank you for what you said. It's last thing I'll say. The poet Robert Hayden told somebody if he was getting older, he said, "I'm just coming into my style, boy. You ain't seen nothing yet." So oh, that's another T-shirt. Yeah, so there you go.
fantastic. Rajnii Eddins, I want to come back to you for another poem, but briefly before you read another one for us, that courage I was talking with Reuben about. When I look at your bio, and again, I was unfamiliar with your work until I started to delve into it for this program tonight. But finding out that you started out doing this at the tender age of 11, it seems to me like you never had that problem with confidence. You never had that problem with bringing that part of yourself out onto the page. But am I wrong about that? Were there moments of doubt, or did you just fly right into this and say, this is me. I'm going to bring myself out with pen and paper here?
Well, you know, interestingly enough, I was a pretty shy teen and pre-adolescent, but I found in poetry that I could access a certain courage, and I think that I have my mother to thank for that nurturance, that nourishing, that positive affirmation, and just the rich um, wealth of so much love and encouragement of my community. It's having adults, again, I would say this for all youth, because all youth and all people deserve this, but having people honor your story and your value, your worth, your words, your expression at any age is incredible. But as a child, receiving that from adults consistently in a space where you're the only, but you're like a peer as an artist, though, it's like you can't replace that feeling. You know, it gives you a certain I don't know, like mantium in your backbone. You're like, oh, I can stand straight with this one, right? Right. So even if I have shy and have aspects, and I go back to my regular Clark Kent grade school appearances, I get to be on the stage with other amazing people, and I can superhero up, and like it's sheer magical.
Lovely. If you have another poem you'd like to read for us, we'd love to hear it.
Definitely. This is actually another free write. I wrote with my friend Norto. I was writing with her online, doing the same format. She gave me the words faux, curtains, wrinkle, wick, Fahrenheit, bound, quilt, official, paradise, posture, arise, and belch. This is kind of what came out of it because I actually received a ping from Twitter, and I learned about these firemen who were mocking the death of a Black child who'd been killed by the police. That kind of changed the whole direction of the poem. So this became an ode to the girl named Fanta. Ode to Fanta. When the firemen spoke of Fanta, comparing her to grape or orange soda, with no knowledge that the mics were still hot, I wonder if they knew they too would burn. That belching grotesque disdain for a child's life had sealed their fates in smoke. That mocking that pretty live innocent Black girl's death had earned them a luxurious spot in their own private eternal fire. These wayward white people weary me. I can see the tiredness in my mother's eyes, and sometimes it's hard not to wish the doers of these ill deeds and their descendants, who would glory in a child's suffering, their own just deserts. Leading to the question, do foes even know their foes? But no, let's not speak of them. There has already been too many words written to grasp and understand the bloody hands and the casual ease and sociopathic acceptance to which the ones I will not name see our massacre as palatable. Let us speak of Fanta, the curtain she looked through before asking her grandmother to go outside, before running outside on strong, sturdy brown legs, legs that could give the wind a run for its money. Yes, let us speak of Fanta, how her small hands would cup her grandmother's face, tracing the wrinkles life had sketched indelibly, finding the smile lines deepening underneath her palms, thinking this is the face of an angel, and that face thinking the same. Let us speak of the candle wick within, the fire she was, that inner power she walked in, imbued from countless flames before. What degree of Fahrenheit is the temperature of the inner spirit of a beautiful Black girl named Fanta? An unbound force, the newest patch to her grandmother's quilt, the official playground champion, the consummate daydreamer, the maker of her own paradise in a land that offered no sanctuary, the get smart artist, master of snappy comeback lines, the swinger of pigtails and double Dutch genius, a newly blossoming flower with posture of a redwood. What will we say of Fanta? What can we say but arise? Watch her walk with the bright flames of sun, her journey scarce begun.
Wow. You took a lot of rage there, it sounds like, and turned it into something really beautiful somehow. I don't know how you did it, but you did it. Legs that could give the wind a run for its money. It's an incredible line in a really powerful poem. What was that one called again, Rajnii? I'm sorry. I forgot the title of that.
Ode to Fanta.
Oh, Tafanta. Okay. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Kerrin, would you like to share another poem with us? We have a little bit of time left. I know we've already gone an hour here and it doesn't feel like it at all, but please, we have more to share, I hope.
Sure. I was thinking, you asked us to read tonight, and I was thinking about how I haven't written much during the pandemic at all. I think there was a question somewhere in the chat or somewhere about how the pandemic has changed us. And I found it really difficult to write anything during these past couple of years, just almost nothing unless I would force it. And I realized that a lot of what I write is out of experience, and there were very few experiences, right? It was hard to experience life in the way, and I really struggled to write, and with my identity as a writer, and not an identity, but like just with, am I writing? I know I'm not. People would ask me what you're working on. And the other day, like 2 days ago, I felt suddenly really joyful, and I hadn't, like, in here, and I hadn't felt that way in a really long time. And I realized that's a lot of where, feeling some kind of thing in my body that feels like joy or excitement or fury, like some strong emotion, is often where the urge to write comes from, right? You started the show with talking about the powerful overflow of emotions. So I wrote this poem the other night. I came home from work and I was feeling so good, and I wrote this poem. So I wanted to read something brand new. It's called Ode to Normal Joys. I'm fit to burst all of a sudden, in love with the solid door and a reel of chickens with doll arms. The day is unpredictable. What is there but abundance, things to see? I'm making complicated dishes in beautiful pots, and the walls stand their ground. My word, the butcher block, the lamps, sappy love songs from the 70s Spotify the whole house this afternoon, and the day softens across the street. You can't even tell me anything new, so full am I of this newness. It might be the springtime or this glass of cheap wine. It might be my new My Map waiting in the cloud, rich with destinations, a whole road trip imagined and almost real, almost. All I know is that I love Mac's Market, how no one there knows my name, all the vegetables and hopeful baskets yawning, the cashier in her hurry brushing me off. How I love an automatic door, a sign that tells me, keep moving. Oh, I know. The fresh air gives up all her ghosts. Listen, I'll speed off in any direction for the love of money and a grass-lined parkway. Listen, there are potholes everywhere. All you have to do is swerve, your control arms holding you up. Listen, there is more to say. A day is more than you make it. That's for damn sure. Tell you what.
That's a new poem, Kerrin, you just shared with us.
Like
I feel blessed. Like, I'm sorry.
I wrote it like 2 nights ago.
2 nights ago. Wow.
Yeah.
I feel
just think it's really fun to read something new, just something that it makes you feel a little scared, which is important. So
it's fantastic. And I could feel the joy coming through that one. I really, really could swerve around those potholes. Swerve around.
Go get them.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Reuben
Tell
Jackson.
you what.
I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
No, tell you what.
Tell you what.
Yeah. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
That's a definition of poetry. Tell you what. Yeah.
Right there.
The kombucha kicked in. It's trouble.
No, it's not trouble. It's a good thing.
No, I know. Good trouble.
Use it, Reuben, because we want to hear one more from you.
Okay. This was published in, it's like Roads Taken, Contemporary Vermont Poetry. And I say this because it's true. And see, when you're an orphan and someone claims you, at least in my experience, it's a very moving thing. And someone recently told me they were at a Zoom retreat, and they used a poem of mine as a prompt. And the guy said, this poem's by Reuben Jackson. And someone in the chat said, because my friend said, well, DC poet Reuben Jackson. This was the person who responded is from Vermont. And they said, that's our Reuben Jackson. And so to be an orphan at this point, and to be pulled, and seriously, it means a lot to me. So this piece is about my mom, who was a language arts teacher who played classical piano, and she's responsible for my attending Goddard College because my father was like, boy, you going to Notre Dame so you can get a job. But this is my mother in the afterlife. It is 1970 again. My mother is shaking her head at the sight of my clothing. She never abandoned her dream of a world without denim. Now there's no escaping her critique. You can't have coffee with God looking like that. She rolls her eyes at Abby Hoffman and at Bill, who owned the corner store near our house. Death has restored her mind. Now she's talking curfew. My brother laughs behind a cloud. Oh, um,
That last line, Reuben, could you talk a little bit about that? My brother laughs behind a cloud.
sure, yeah. What I tried to do here was tell you a lot of things without using a lot of language. And, my brother uh, is deceased, as is my mom. But, it's still, my mother has those earthly characteristics still. It's like the curfew thing for her was, if it was midnight and you came home at 12:01, you better get a good lawyer. And my brother, who was 8 years old, would laugh and say, Rube, you should have been home at 11:57. So it's like humor. And uh, then the line, death has restored her mind. My mom had Alzheimer's. And so there's a kind of healing and joy and toughness within that. And the other thing I would say is, like, my mom believed in revolution, not Facebook revolution where people write unacceptable on their pages. She meant, like, what changed things around, but she also believed you should look good while you did it. So for her, denim was, like an inroad Satan had made. So I was trying to think about her characteristics, and yet, back to what we said earlier, variations on a theme.
Yeah.
We think we're so different. And I would tell this to students well, not just teaching in Burlington, but everywhere. I said, you think you're really different, but you'll look up one day, 40, 50 years, and go, what was that guy's name? Mr. Jackson, Mr. Jensen. He had a point. I'm so much like my mother. It's not funny. Uh, I curse like her sister, my Aunt Bertha. But so they're like these genetic IVs in your arm, and you look up, and they're sources of comfort now because these people are not here. Back to what Kelly said, there used to be more of us laughing at, his friends' jokes. So that's a lot of, kind of specifics about this piece, but it's a lot of what I've been working with the last, well, even before this dastardly, I want to use other words, pandemic came into being.
Well, even though we're doing this virtually tonight, and I said, behind stage before we began tonight, I wish we could all be in one room together with a live audience and we could all hug each other afterwards, because honestly, I'm not a hugger, but I wish I could hug all of you right now for what you've shared with us tonight. The commonality, Reuben, I think that you were talking about there, and the great richness, the tapestry of language that you all presented tonight, all the metaphor, all the wonderful images, all the touching on the personal, but the political also, and everything that we're all going through. We're all going through it together, whether we realize it or not. And I think what you've all demonstrated tonight is how powerful this art form can be. And if we'll just listen to each other and to embrace these things, it really could. And again, I don't want to be Pollyanna about it, but I really believe that it could all bring us a little bit closer to our own shared humanity. And to me, that's what the best poetry does. And I've heard some of the best poetry tonight. For those of you who are watching, I don't know how many of you are out there. If you were as moved, half as moved as I was tonight, I think you're going to come away from this night remembering something truly remarkable. So and I think we can share this on YouTube or whoever you need to send it to. Please do so, because I feel we've been blessed tonight to have you all here and share this remarkable poetry with us and your thoughts about the art form as well. I really want to thank you all so very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
thanks for
very much.
having us.
Appreciate
Reuben
you.
Jackson, Kerrin McCadden, and Rajnii Eddins. And this has been our celebration of Poetry Month. April is Poetry Month, and we are sending it out in style. Reuben, I am going to play some Stevie Wonder, Sir Duke later, Duke Ellington's birthday. Thank you all again so very much for sharing your remarkable work with us. Really appreciate it.
That's it.
Thank
Thank you.
you.